2.
All right. So I'm going to gently ease us in. We're going to do a soft open to give our three watchers a minute to collect their thoughts. But in the meantime, I guess, Nathaniel, if you want to tell us, make sure if everything looks good on your end.
Everything looks good.
Perfect. I'll go ahead and we'll gently ease our way into our introduction. So, for anybody watching live or if you're watching later, welcome in. This is the Georgia chapter of the Percussive Arts Society, and it's our first roundtable discussion. This is the first time we're trying the live stream, talking to our panelists today about warming up on percussion. We're going to go through a few of the fundamental things that we all have to go through at some point. We'll get all these different perspectives. We've got some great PDFs. We'll be doing screen shares along the way. Please, if you are watching this, do subscribe to the channel because this is going to become a regular event where we'll bring in guests to talk about marching and drum set and world percussion and anything you could want to. So be subscribed to make sure you can turn on the notification bell so you see when we go live in the future. I'm going to go ahead and introduce my three co-hosts today. My name is Andrew Bennett, by the way. I'm going to be playing moderator today. But our other three, we have our Georgia chapter president, Nate Lee.
Good to be here.
We have our VP, Vice President, the man himself, Nathaniel Gork.
Morning, everybody.
Also, thank you to Nathaniel for hosting today on the using OBS and all that fun stuff to make sure that we can actually do the live stream. And we also have our double duty, Mr. Secretary and Treasurer, Mr. Ryan Smith.
I'm a double threat. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And what we'll do is as you guys speak for the first time, I'd love for you to actually, kind of introduce yourself a little more. I don't want to steal your thunder about talking about where you work and what you do. But just so everybody know, this is our leadership of the Georgia chapter of the Percussive Arts Society. We're going to go ahead and dive in. We're starting out with snare drum. That's kind of the most common place for warming up. To me, snare drum also includes practice pad, which everybody does, hopefully a couple of hours a day, maybe 5 to 6 hours a day on the practice pad if you're lucky. But let's jump over to Nate Lee. Tell us a little bit about yourself and then about some of your snare drum warm-ups.
Great, yeah. Well, if you guys don't know me, I am Dr. Nate Lee. I work at Reinhardt University and have taught there for the last 4 years. My background is pretty varied. I went to Indiana University and got to study with actually 6 different teachers there in a variety of areas, including a couple years of dedicated Afro-Cuban study that maybe we'll get into a little bit later. And did my graduate degrees with Tim Adams at UGA. So I've picked up a lot of tips and ideas along the way, and maybe one of the most meaningful to me was when I first started at Indiana. One of the big things that drew me there was Anthony Cerrone. Everybody has seen the Red Book, Portraits in Rhythm, or maybe you have the Advanced Study Guide copy, the blue one. I had the red one, and when I started there, lesson 1 was he was very disappointed in me that I had not purchased the study guide. So I went out and spent the extra money to get the study guide. And literally, he'd never look at it, but he would say all the same things. He had taught out of this book so much. So I had the pleasure of studying with him in his last semester as a teacher. So one of the first things that we did in those lessons, we worked out of the Goldenberg book. We did a little bit of timpani later on, but our main project was snare drum. And he started in this book, Master Technique Builders for Snare Drum. Maybe you guys have seen this. This is such a great concept because what he did was use his connections to other orchestra musicians, drum set musicians, even a couple of marching guys to compile their warm-up ideas, their warm-up routines into one place. So if you're looking for a way to just start your snare drum warm-up exploration, I think this is a great idea. The table of contents here, you can see, there's some names that you'll know, like Louis Belson, Anthony Cerrone put himself in the book, of course, John Beck, Gordon Peters, Mitchell Peters, Fred Sanford. So you recognize some names. There were some names I didn't recognize, and and they all have valid things to say. So you get a little bit of text at the beginning, kind of laying out their concepts and how to use their exercises, and then you get a page or two of exercises. And the way that we did this in lessons was each week I would use one of those warm-up routines daily, and then I would come in and play through the entire routine for him in our lesson. So I think it's it's an interesting way to structure. I have just an example to show you of a couple of my favorite exercises here. So this is from Leland C. Beach's collection, orchestra musician, long since retired. And if you look down here at number 8 and 9, you can see this is Mr. Cerrone's marking where he connected these. And what we actually did was play 8 and 9 back to back. So it's a double stroke roll on the right hand, double stroke roll on the left hand, closed roll right hand, closed roll left hand, with double paradiddles in between. And I have played this exercise every day since that day that I first played it in 2006. It is just the best way that I have found to make sure that I've got control of my rebound, that I can go from 2 to 3 to 4 strokes and back. And it gets from both sides. So a lot of young students struggle with left-handed rolls, starting things on their weak hand. This is a great way to do that. There's a shorter version of it after, where you just have these little 5-stroke rolls, again, open and then closed with paradiddles. And then you see in 12 and 13, you can vary the accents. So you can accent the beginning of the roll, accent the end of the roll. So just this, 8 through 13, I think is one of my favorite things I've taken away from this book.
Nice. And you do all those rolls all the different ways, huh? Doubles, triples, buzzes.
Yeah, my standard closed roll is a triple stroke roll. That's the way that Tim Adams teaches it, and it's kind of that Cleveland school, if you will, of playing snare drum rolls. Is we want it to be even and clear and a little bit kind of throaty, not the real tight, very compact rolls that some other people do.
Sure.
So, yeah, the main point of that exercise is just to go between doubles and triples.
Cool.
All right.
Cool. Well, since you spoke up a minute ago, Nathaniel, you want to go ahead and tag in and talk a little bit about some snare drum stuff?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for snare drum technique and warm up, I mean, who here doesn't have the first page of the George Lawrence Stone stick control memorized, right? I mean, I'll sit here all day and I'll slap my metronome on. And, we were talking about, drum set warm up too. I use that book extensively in developing my drum set technique too, because I can just sit here at my pad, I got my pad right here, and I can just sit here and I can tap my feet back and forward. I can read down that first page. You do alternating feet, you do 4 on the floor, you can do samba feet. And so I find that that helps not just my snare drum technique, but, my foot patterns and my foot stability when I go to play drum set too. So I really like that, right? If you have a student that you haven't introduced the first page of stick control to, please do. Plus his stuff on flams is like killer, just absolutely killer. But there's actually a book I was working out of recently, the Chester Englander drum set book, where he talks about using your mouth as another instrument too in order to sort of develop increased independence between your limbs and between your mouth. And so I've started doing that too. And that was something that was kind of introduced to me during my master's when I was looking at jazz drum set stuff. It's to sort of sing through the head while you're working on things. You just take 12 bars of exercise, and what I would do is I would do 12 bars of the George Lawrence Stone stuff, and you just sing jazz heads over it. And I find that sort of thing works. And when you think about all of the stuff that John Pratt did, all of his snare drum stuff had tunes to go along with it. And so that's just something that I always try and do with my warm-ups, is to have some sort of vocal routine that goes with it too, whether I'm counting through it, whether I'm audiating what my hands are supposed to be doing, paradiddle, right, left, right, that sort of thing. So I find that I have a lot of flexibility and creativity just with that first page of the George Lawrence Stone book. Like, really, I love that thing, man. And particularly when you get to other people's warm-up routines, I don't know how many master classes we've all been in where we see other people's warm-up routines and how many variations on the idea of those first pages of stick control we see. And it's just really hard to argue with the popular consensus as far as that goes. And of course, you can mix it up a little bit. You know, I like to throw on some funk music while I warm up. You know, a little group called Here Comes the Mummies. Really good stuff, just to keep you focused, to keep you interested. And again, you know, they have a lot of really funny lyrics, so I can find myself singing along with that to work on that. And I think that's kind of where I start out, beginning of every day, just taking some of those stick control exercises, getting my hands working, getting my feet working, getting my mouth working in order to try and connect everything.
Yeah, and I dig, so our good friend Emily, who's at the Halls of Music there in Macon, Georgia, I actually mentioned her to you guys earlier. She says she loves using that book all the time, likes the idea of using it across the drum set. I'm going to throw this out for anybody interested in drum sets. There's a guy named Thomas Lang. He's just an absolutely monster drummer. He has a whole book about creative coordination, and honestly, most of it is taking stick control, like the first page, and you do number 1 on the hands, number 1 on the feet, number 1 on the hands, number 2 on the feet. And then you go all the way through like 30, whatever. And you do number 2 on the hands, number 1 on the feet, number 2. I love that concept. I even do that with, I'm not trying to jump ahead too much to marimba stuff, but talking about stick control, I will take the right and left of one hand, right and left of the other hand, and I'll do 1 on both hands, and I'll do 1 and 2, and then 1 and 3 kind of things. So you're doing like left 1 1 2 2 1 1 2 2 while you're doing 3 4 3 4 3, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's amazing how much I wish we could go back in time and tell George Lawrence Stone what he was doing for our industry, and how basically that's the only book I tell my kids to buy. I'm like, get that book, that's all you need. We'll figure out the rest. So and I'm like, you'll never even learn past page 3.
You can take care of his family and descendants by paying the $10 to get the hard copy of the book and not downloading the PDF.
Yeah.
You'll probably end up buying a few copies over the years.
Yeah.
Well,
I think I had 3 or 4 last time I checked.
Then when the family starts to go hungry, then you pick up accents and rebounds, and then they're set.
Yeah, I wanted to add just one more thing, just talking about the influence of stick control. Daphnis Prieto is an incredible Cuban drum set player that you guys might know. He has a book that just got put out a couple years ago. I'm going to mess up the title, but World of Rhythmic Possibilities, I think is it. It's a thick book, a monster of a book. But a whole section of that book is concepts that he used in Cuba from stick control. He got this book and he's like, well, I mean, it's not really a drum set book, but you know, what could I do? And so he's got these systems, you know, kind of Gary Chaffee-like systems, but they're from an Afro-Cuban perspective of what you're doing with your right hand, what you're doing with your left foot, and then you use your snare drum as R and bass drum as L, and play all the stick control stuff back and forth between snare drum and bass drum as you're playing cymbal or cowbell, or in his case, frying pan sometimes.
Nice. Well, there's actually a jazz variation with the George Lawrence Stone book that I do, where you put the ride cymbal on the right hand and you put the hi-hat on the left hand, and the right is your bass drum, the snare is your the left hand, and then you're playing jazz patterns and you're doing stick control with your right foot and left hand. So
yeah,
nice. great ideas.
Yeah. It's endless. We could have a whole day talking about this book.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want one more level of interesting, you can then vary the subdivisions. So play all the same patterns, and like every 2 bars switch to triplets or sixteenths or fivelets, and just keep the same thing going.
So For the sake of time, because this is a rabbit hole we could go down, I want to go ahead and hear from Ryan. What do you got on your snare drum warm-ups?
Sure. So I'm Ryan Smith. I'm down at Valdosta State University. Greetings from Florida, basically. Don't let my supervillain chair behind me scare you off from what I say. I bring a slightly different perspective to my snare drum warm-up from the fact that I was a marimba player, or kind of how I identified myself for a long time, and came to the instrument much later in terms of having like a fundamental routine that I was trying to develop. I was also at a much better place at that point in terms of knowledge of the pedagogy to be able to find the things that I thought fit my hands well. But I'm kind of a keep it simple, stupid person. I try to get a lot of mileage out of a very small amount of exercises. One, that's just practicality. Two, as I get older and am working in academia, the time for myself gets shorter and shorter. So I've really had to streamline what I do over the years. So there's a little bit of idealism when I have the time with the things that I have listed. And then there's kind of a practical side of, if I have time to do something, what am I absolutely going to do? So the first place that I go for warming up on snare drum is Emil Scholey's The Roll, which is a great, very cheap, very small book. But I use the roll section 1. And I make it hard, right? So I'm trying to find kind of that meditative and Zen-like place, which we alluded to a little bit earlier this morning, by playing really soft snare drum rolls. I play the exercises 1 through 25 continuously, and I just listen and adapt as I play. So I'm not trying to sit and repeat exercises. If I make a mistake, I try to, in real time, adapt to what I'm hearing and what it feels like on the drum. I'm playing, like I said, as soft as I can. And then I put one more wrinkle into it. I'm a right-handed player, so I make myself lead everything with my weak hand, period. Every warm-up that I do, I will go with the left and not with my right, because I trust my right hand to be able to do what it's used to doing. So I use the roll section 1 to try and find a very meditative place, but also to calm me down, center me a little bit. I do use the alluded to stick control by George Lawrence Stone. I really love the first 14 exercises of that book, because that's all your combinations of single, double, triple, and then quadruple strokes. And then the rest of the book is built off of the various permutations incorporating those elements in. So I like the first 14. I do play them consecutively as well without stopping, usually the Stone 20 times each without stopping. And I like to put dynamic control into it as well. So one of those things for me, coming from the marimba, playing soft snare drum, I work that a lot to try and make sure that that area, I'm not just playing where I'm comfortable, but that I'm playing from a place where it causes me some physical discomfort or strain, psychologically or physically. So I do a lot of very soft stick control stuff through various tempos. And then the thing that I really like to use, and where I get the most mileage, which I'll come back to, is Mitchell Peters' Developing Dexterity. I don't know how many of you have used that book. I love all of Mitchell's stuff for snare drum. I haven't used basic patterns, but or basic studies, elementary studies. That's what it's called.
Elementary studies. Elementary studies is good too.
It's real good. Thick.
When I came to it, for me personally, it wasn't something I needed to use. I haven't started a beginner in a long time, but a lot of his other books are really fantastic. And I use the elementary rebound patterns on page 6 and 7. Let me see if I can pull those.
Actually, real quick, while you're finding that, would you mind saying the name of that roll book one more time and who it's by? We've got somebody asking about it.
Sure, it's Emil Scholey. The book is simply called The Roll.
Okay, and I'm a terrible speller. Would you mind spelling his name?
Sure. Actually,
Unless you want to drop
me
it
in the other view. Sorry, that's backwards.
Oh, that's okay.
So email like Emil Richards. Scholey is Scholle.
I believe he was a member of the Cleveland Orchestra Percussion, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, indeed.
All right. I'm gonna share that in the chat. All right, carry on.
Sure. So where I do probably the bulk of my work is in these couple of pages, because I can adapt them to a number of different concepts. So like the roll section 1, I always lead with my left. I will do a little bit of mixing of some of the patterns, but I primarily play down the right side of each page consecutively. 8 to 16, maybe 20 times if I'm feeling unencumbered by life. But mostly I try to keep it relatively short and simple. I will take these, and it's working a lot of your open, so like rudimental snare drum stuff. But I like to adapt it to work on like triple stroke. For those, the next 2 pages out of this are the same exact patterns, just with the buzz, the rolled notation. So I don't even bother looking at those. I just adapt it to however I want. So it's mostly double and triple stroke. And I go through a wide range of tempos. I go through like basically loud just to get my hands loose, and then I'll go soft to make things a little bit more uncomfortable. And that's where a lot of my warm up will go. And then usually I'm off teaching and doing the academia thing, which is great. So that's kind of my main elements that I work towards. And then I also use the Pratt and Wilcoxon, so like the All-American Drummer and the 14 Modern Contest solos from a slow tempo to make sure that I'm getting more of the actual like single paradiddle, double paradiddle, Radamacues, drags. And then I will go through and play them open, and I will go through and play them closed as well when I have time, just to change the style up.
Yeah, I always think that it's really important to tell students, listen, playing softer is harder than playing loud. It's nice to start nice and loud, get those hands loose, and then just sink everything down to a nice piano. That'll get your hands really working.
Or hell, just playing the Pratt or Wilcoxon stuff at piano.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's a great workout. Not for the faint of heart sometimes.
No. I would love to hear someone do Pianissimo, my friend Norman.
I'd share this. The Al Payson page, you see that chart? There's it's a big, like just one column shaded area at the top and shaded area at the bottom. And so he actually says in the book, 90% of your work should be on those 2 extremes.
I love it. I love that idea.
The top 5% of what you do, the low 5% of what you do, and the middle, it's like right hand versus left hand. We trust that we can play in that range without much effort.
One thing I would say, when I play the roll section 1, some of those things I will only play on the drum because I don't find it effective to listen to my buzz on the pad quite as much, I mean, I'll do it when I need to, but I prefer to do it on the drum. It's probably not going to bother anybody in terms of volume. So
here's a question. In some circles, it's popular to recommend playing on soft surfaces like pillows or the moon gel pads or things like that. Does anybody do that to try to work on your rebound?
Oh yeah. Yep. Double strokes all day on a pillow. If I can do them on a pillow, I can play them on anything.
I usually do. Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
I'm kind of the opposite. I go for kind of hard surface. I like to hear clarity on everything as much as I can. I kind of mix my surfaces, but it's usually harder so I can hear everything.
Yeah, I essentially have a double folded towel that stays on my practice pad all the time so I can work on my finger response. I'd rather feel what I'm doing than need to hear it. And so, if I have a double stack towel, sometimes I'll trip it over, make it 4 times just to make my life miserable. But yeah, I don't do a lot on an actual drum.
I'll say, I agree with what Ryan was saying about mixed surfaces. Like I've got that stack of pads. There it is. There's a ProLogix, which is a workout. I've got an old school Real Feel, and then I've got a Zymox marching pad. So depending on what I need to work on, I just shuffle that one to the top. So I've got either rebound, workout, or that clarity. It's basically like playing on a table. You can hear every note. So, which I think at the end of the day, if you practice on a variety of stuff, we play a variety of stuff. The snare drum response, the timpani response, mount response, like they're not the same. So it's nice to switch them up.
Drumeo, people may be familiar with the drum set education site. They actually have a practice pad that has always looked interesting to me. I haven't ever bought it, but is meant to simulate the multiple surfaces of a drum set. So there's like a floor tom type of feel, a rack tom, a snare drum, a harder cymbal surface.
Hmm.
I would think that would be kind of interesting to have around as a practice surface, just to vary it out.
Cool. Well, I think for the sake of time, maybe we can go ahead and we'll segue into mallet stuff next. And actually, Ryan, you're mentioning that you identified primarily as a marimbist. Do you want to kick this segment off?
Sure, and I'll have like the least structured part of it.
Okay.
Because of that. So for two mallet keyboard, the things that I like to work on, obviously the instruction course for Xylophone Book by George Hamilton Green is fantastic. We're all familiar with that in some way, shape, or form. But in particular, when it's me warming up, I like to use the ragtime lessons. And oftentimes I'll just play them on a practice pad. I won't play them at the keyboard. So I can hear double stops. It kind of works my left hand a little bit more anyway. And then for, for mallet stuff, I tend to work pretty exclusively out of the Lee Howard Stevens method of movement and the Kevin Bobo permutations for the advanced marimbist. Working things like double lateral and triple lateral strokes, the independent roll, large interval position, those kinds of things. So if I get the opportunity, I'll play some double vertical strokes to start out. But a lot of what I do is based on the repertoire that I'm playing. So I take that creative approach to loosening up based on the technical elements that are in the piece that I'm working on. So for example, like Michael Burritt's Prelude No. 5, nice and short and sweet. I tend to take the idea, I don't know if y'all can still see me. He uses a lot of inside, outside, outside, inside lateral strokes. And instead of just playing the piece as it is, I just kind of work my hands within the patterns. Do those kinds of things. It reinforces what's going on in the music, makes me think a little bit about how to extend or maybe truncate what's there. Just kind of makes me think about the music in a slightly different way. So I'll take things like that, look at my double vertical, obviously work on some of the other like somewhat rotational elements to it. So it's all repertoire based for me. And I probably get more time playing the floor than I get time playing the actual marimba. So I tend to just focus on how my hands are moving, what my technique looks like, making sure that the things that are a little bit sticky within the Stevens system in particular, like large interval position and octave double verticals and such, is at least getting hammered through. Even if I don't have access to the board. Oftentimes, when it comes to playing keyboard, the situations I find myself in are playing at other like conventions or conferences where I walk into a situation, I don't get to play the instrument before I'm supposed to play on an unfamiliar instrument. So I have to do something to move my hands. And I'll be honest, I use more snare drum warm up for that kind of thing because it's portable. Then I actually use keyboard. You're really unlikely to have the opportunity to warm up in the way that you want to. So a lot of the snare drum stuff, even though this is the keyboard segment, it has been much more applicable when I've been getting ready to play marimba or like backstage for recitals or concertos, stuff like that. And that's all I've got for keyboard. I try to be creative with it. I mean, in a nutshell. Use your repertoire, work on the things that make you uncomfortable.
If I can jump in for a second, I think it's worth kind of tagging on what you were just saying about the snare drum warm up. I think at the end of the day, we have to delineate warm ups versus exercises. Because if we said, what are your marimba exercises, you could probably talk for a few hours, but a warm up is literally you got to get blood to your hands so you can play. And throwing down full strokes at 60 BPM on a pad, that gets blood to your hands. Doesn't matter if it's marimba or timpani or reek or whatever it is, like snare drum does the job. So we can have a different day for favorite marimba exercises.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I could tag along a little bit with what Ryan said, I found that I started not wanting to warm up before I play marimba. Sometime during my masters, I realized that exactly what you're talking about, you don't get time to actually warm up on the instrument that you're about to play. And so I started forcing myself to do cold runs of my marimba repertoire. And so, what's my marimba warm-up technique? I don't have one. Like, I go in and I play because I've tried to cultivate the ability to play cold and to be able to be attentive to how I'm feeling, to what's happening in my hands, what's happening in my body, and what's happening on the instrument instantly. And, is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. I don't suggest that people who are just starting to learn marimba do it, but particularly when I was in a performance-driven environment where I had to be ready to play at any moment, I sort of found that was what was necessary. So
It's the stark reality of the situation.
yeah, you don't.
You adapt it to what you're given, not based on what you think you should get or what the ideal situation is. So, I play double vertical stuff on the practice pad because I probably have the pad with me and the mallets, but the instrument's in another room being played by somebody else. So you do what you have to do.
How often do we as percussionists get the ideal situation?
I think Rob Knopper would give you a gold star for the cold run thing.
Yeah.
All right, you want to take it, Nate? Round us out on the marimba?
Yeah, and I'm going to go kind of a different direction because something I make sure that I do, I love the instruction course for xylophone book. I've probably played through that whole thing 3 or 4 times. I just keep it on the stand. But another thing that I really like to do is you incorporate sight reading into my warm-up because, again, it gets the blood flowing. I don't know what's coming. So, it's a warm up for your eyes, warm up for your brain as well. And so I wanted to share one of my favorite sources for sight reading material, which is actually on IMSLP. So people might be familiar with the International Music Score Library Project, which is a catalog of all the music that's out there in the public domain. And I've found kind of a hidden gem. I'm actually not sure how I discovered this, but Clark Kimberling is a guy that has spent quite a bit of time composing for the soprano recorder. So this is soprano recorder music, and it's one of like 10 or 11 collections, each of which have 200 plus pages, and they all look like this. So this is from his Latin collection. It's got music from Brazil, from South America, from the Caribbean. This is a Brazilian tune that he's taken and arranged. And what I love about it is, on a lot of the pages, there is a key change in the middle. This one actually doesn't have it, but some of them even have 2 key changes. That you'll go from A minor to B minor to B major, and so I recommend this and use this for my students, and I keep usually a copy on my stand, and I'll just read through 3 or 4 of these per day, trying to take the written tempo, but you could do it at any tempo you wanted. Does anybody else have sight reading material that they use for warm-up?
I usually just go to IMSLP and search Baroque music, solo Baroque music. I love sight reading Baroque music because it's very easy to tell when you're wrong.
Yeah. Uber tonal.
Mm-hmm.
And Ryan's grabbing something.
Like Pasquale Bona's Rhythmical Articulation, which is a vocal.
Yeah, the vocal book. Yeah.
But any material for sight reading that's not percussion based is great. If you ever are in a professional situation, sight reading, and you get to play a piece that's written by a percussionist that's wholly idiomatic, then you've just hit the jackpot, because most of the time, if you read anybody else's music, you're going to find a lot of interesting sticking variants and choices that you have to make that are much better than just playing something that lays on the instrument nicely.
Right.
I always fall back to our boy Mitchell Peters, man. His fundamental method for mallets. The sight reading examples in there, that's like 100 whatever of them. none of them are extreme, but it's nice. It's nice if you never learn them. They're always sight reading, but to me, it's like, can I sight read this and make it sound cool? Because again, they're exercises. They're very much based on arpeggios and patterns and stuff. But can I play it like it's a legit solo? Can I play this for 1,000 people and not be embarrassed?
Yeah, and I think to that point, Peter's stuff is great for pattern recognition because so much of what he writes for all instruments is based on patterns and based on things that you can ultimately predict. And that's definitely a skill that we want to work on.
Sweet. Does anybody else have anything mallet wise before we move on to the old kettle drums?
I do like scales. Just a reminder to everyone out there: do your scales, do your chords. That'll help.
I think everything we're saying today is probably like you've paid your dues. You've learned the rudiments. You've learned your scales. You've done your all-state auditions with it. You've done all your patterns. Now you're a legit free artist. What do you do now? So yeah, I'm sure we could. There's plenty of fundamental courses out there that I think are amazing. I like the idea that today we're like, hey, you know what? You're on your own. Maybe it's been quarantine and you're stuck at home and you're like, I don't know what to do with myself. Here's some ideas a year later. But we will go ahead. I think it would be a great time to talk about the timpani. And Nathaniel, why don't we throw the mic over to you?
So one of the things that was always the biggest focus of all of my timpani lessons is just sound production. And so how do I warm up on timpani? I'll tell you, I sit there. Bong. Okay. Bong. Is it the same? Is it different? Okay, how's the striking area? How's the stroke? How's the rebound? Okay. Bong, right? And I will sit there and these very spacious, very open, very full strokes, entirely focused on sound. Entirely focused on sound production. Just making sure that I'm getting the quality of sound that I'm looking for, right? We've already gone over snare drum stuff. I mean, how many times have I worked on chops going between drums or sticking permutations? When I want to play timpani, it's all about sound. And so I'm going to sit there for 5 or 10 minutes, and that's all I'm going to do is very open single strokes. And then once the single strokes are good, bong, 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 right? That's it, right? If I can get that quality of sound that I'm looking for, I'm not scared of anything that's going to come at me on the music stand.
I mean, unless you're playing a con solo, like how often do we chop out on timpani?
Right. Yeah. I mean, what are we doing? Moto Perpetuo from the Elliott Carter book?
Exactly. And again, that would go back to what Ryan said earlier. Your warm-ups are based on the music you're playing. If you're playing Carter or con, yes, you might need to do some faster warm-ups. But if you're playing an orchestra, you're kind of playing rolls and whole notes. So
big fat tonic dominant stuff, I want to make sure that's the most beautiful 2 notes that you're going to hear from the percussion section.
Cool. Well, on my monitor, Ryan's right next to you, Nathaniel. Ryan, why don't we hear about your timpani warm-ups?
So a lot of my thought process on what I do to warm up, I mean, the principal timpani job for the Valdosta Symphony is part of my job here. So I get to play a lot more than I used to. I've based a lot of my thoughts on this around both how does this function in a middle, high school, collegiate level, but also because of the pandemic where, many of us lost access to instruments. And timpani is just that kind of thing where if you are in a school situation, you can go a long time without playing it, right? When you think about like percussion ensemble, it's still pretty rare to have more than one temp part if it's part of it at all. Obviously in band orchestral music, more than one player is the exception. And if you're teaching like high school percussion ensemble, you're not going to quadruple the temp part for practical reasons and such. So I've always looked at it from a point of stroke, and I've been working on trying to help my students reverse engineer their stroke. So I've been lucky. I take the Mitchell Peters elementary rebound patterns again, and I've got the mirror thrown up in front of me. Sorry, it's over there, but I'm just looking at what I'm doing. I'm trying to make sure that my grip is smooth. So I just play through, because what we're doing is we're playing a lot of single strokes. And I don't play a lot of really fast rolls. So when I get down to the end of that book, or at end of the page, just go ahead and move on. You know, that's probably as fast as I will ever need to play. So I try to make sure that I'm smooth. I try to bring out some rhythmic aspects of those exercises with a little bit of subtle inflection to try and make sure that the rhythms that I would play would come out. But it's pretty much all single stroke stuff. When I play those exercises, I lead with my left hand, like the snare drum stuff, but that leads to some interesting, like, first repetition is left hand led, second repetition is right. So you have to close the pattern to get back around, and you find some little quirks in there anyway. But that's mostly what I do, is I just play in front of the mirror on the pad, really watch my stroke. If I can get this to happen, then I feel pretty good about what my sound is going to be. That's a little bit cavalier based on the fact that I don't feel like my playing spot is ever an issue. The sort of the fundamental aspects, I feel like I don't always have to focus on that. It's good when I walk up to the drums, but for anybody that's younger, you always have to watch out for that stuff, because just because you stroke it well doesn't mean you're going to get the right sound if you're in the wrong place. So I've been looking at stroke a lot and trying to play away from the instrument, because my students who come in that have very little experience playing timpani, most of them struggle. Even if they're drum set players, like playing ride cymbal, for example, or even if they're keyboard players having played Stevens, that concept of the French grip with one stick is something that's been very difficult. So trying to get them, it's easy to kind of think, okay, well, here's your stroke. This is what it looks like. Great, do it. But a lot of there's a lot of struggle in that I've encountered over the years, where it just feels really unnatural. So from playing from a consecutive hand motion standpoint, then I try to reverse engineer that stroke. Like, look, you can do this. It's smooth, nice. That's what you need. And that's what I do when I warm up. So nothing overly exciting, just sequential, logical, single strokes. Watch it in the mirror.
I always love the idea of wearing a striped shirt too. I always recommend to students, if you're wearing horizontal stripes, looking in a mirror, all of a sudden you have something regulating your stick height.
All right, Nate, close us out. Give us some timpani tips.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to plug a couple of books that I love. My timpani maintenance work is a lot of just going through these etude books and making sure that everything is sharp. Because like everybody has said, timpani is about sound. It's about consistency. It's about dexterity, being able to get back and forth between drums. And I feel like the Richard Hochreiner books do a really great job of incorporating all of that. And you get some cool German sayings on the bottom. So you can learn a little German as well. So Richard Hochreiner, the volume 1 is really all you need. There's like 50 or 60 etudes in there.
Ubungen.
Yeah, Ubungen. Yeah, for sure. I don't even remember what that means. But also, there's a new book, Traditional Roll Etudes for the Modern Timpanist by Mr. Tim Adams. And I actually had a part in helping this book come to life by doing all these finale arrangements. So yeah, you can check it out. And you see here, there are short etudes, but there's a variety of different role-based challenges here. You know, different subdivisions. And then you can take all of these, they don't have tempo markings, so you could play them at different tempos with different subdivisions. I think that's very important for us as snare drummers and as timpanists to always be thinking about like table of time stuff. The famous Joe Morello concept of playing 1 note per beat, and then 1.5 notes per beat, 2 notes, 3 notes, 4 notes, and he goes all the way up to 12 or 13 in his book. 13 subdivisions per beat.
Yeah, that was one of those exercises that I meant to mention for the snare drum warm-up. I think anyone who's not doing that sort of stuff really should, you know. Again, looking at other
There it is.
people's warm up sheets, you know, 1 per beat, 1.5 per beat, 2 per beat, and again all the way up to 12, right?
Right.
We've all
You
seen
could
something
even-
like this.
yeah. Yeah, so you can start it at 55 beats a minute, I think is what Joe says, but you can go 60, 50, in anything that's slow. And if you want a real challenge, put your metronome down underneath that tempo, or put it on like half note clicks so that you get very, very little feedback.
Hey, real quick, Nathaniel, I think our your stream might have kicked over to a different
There we go.
screen if you want to.
Yep.
All right. I see everything about 30 seconds later over here on my iPad. So I was like,
Yeah,
that's an interesting pattern.
appreciate the heads up. Appreciate the heads up.
Everyone watching, this is our first time. We're working out the bugs, so thank you for sticking with us. We'll be better in the future. But this, I think this has gone well. We've gone. I mean, that's the big three, right? No matter what kind of, I mean, accessories are big. Good. We could probably have a whole day talking about tambourine, but
Maybe we should.
but the big, if we're thinking, let's say it's like high schoolers or early college people watching, that's kind of the big three for every audition: snare, mounts, and timpani. And you got to have a good warm up. I believe Nate and Ryan, you both mentioned some stuff about some hand percussion, war percussion stuff. Nate, do you want to talk a little bit about what you had for some hand drum stuff?
Yeah, and this is one of my areas of expertise. So something I get asked about a good bit is, I'm trying to learn conga drums. Just what do I do? Like, because there's not a very well established method of learning hand drums, essentially. But I had the privilege of studying with Michael Spiro for a couple of years at Indiana. And I think the thing that's unique about Spiro is that, he has an ethnomusicology background. He didn't start playing percussion until he was 21 years old. He was in college and he switched his major to ethnomusicology, fell in love with Cuban music, with Afro-Cuban music, and has taken probably 20 trips down to Havana and Matanzas. So he's one of the first white people to ever show up in Matanzas, Cuba, and just learn from these Bata masters. And one of his contributions, he's published a lot of books and is continuing to, but this book, the Conga Drummer's Guidebook, is something I'll recommend to anybody. And there's actually, if you want to go even more basic than this, there's a DVD that he has called Introduction to the Conga Drum. And they both lay out, the DVD is especially helpful because you can hear what the sounds are supposed to be. What does an open tone sound like? What does a slap sound like? And how do you contort your hand to get that consistently? That is the number one thing that I continue to work on hand drums, is just always making sure that I have access to all the sounds that I can make. And then there are some different fluidity exercises going back and forth between the sounds that he lays out in his book that are very helpful too.
Nice. And Ryan, I think you had some stuff there as well.
Oh, sure. So I'll take it from a slightly different area with the rate, which is an instrument and frame drums in general, something that's been relatively new to me. So really only a few years, but really kind of piqued my imagination about what it could do. When I got introduced to these drums, I saw Glenn Velez playing with a Renaissance group. So like killer frame drumming, not period appropriate, but super killer. And at that point I was like, wow, I don't think I can do that. So I had invited a colleague of mine in to do a clinic, and he did a lot of basic hand drum stuff, and it kind of gave me that gateway, or the push at least, to start messing around with these things on my own. Fortunately here at the university, I can kind of use it as my intellectual playground to develop and work on some of these things. Mostly it kind of goes along with percussion being such a wide variety of instruments and genres of music. I mean, you can pretty much be a student your whole life and still only kind of scratch the surface of everything that's out there. But as part of my warm-up routines, I use that Mitchell Peters elementary rebound studies as universally as I can, right? So I've got basically a set pattern of things that I'm going through. I don't have to bring the book with me anymore or actually have the technology other than my phone and a metronome. And I can start applying things to that. So some of the music that I've been playing, playing the Rican cabaret position as such. Stuff like that, where when I'm using my right hand to get some rhythmic patterns on the zill, and my middle finger is the wonky finger in there because it's longer than its counterparts playing. It has the hardest time timing to get a really clean articulation on the instrument. So I use a lot of those rebound studies to produce different tones and just mess around with my fingers. So I have found a really nice universal application to that one aspect of my warm-up routine that works really well on a number of different instruments and on things that you might not expect.
Very cool. Now, Nathaniel, did you want to add anything to that? Or are you gonna what do you feel in the world of percussion?
No, I mean, as again, I'm not much of a frame drum sort of guy, but I do know I take the same sort of approach with accessory instruments as I do with my timpani technique, attempting to get consistent sounds. If you can get 10 exactly the same notes on a tambourine, then I think you're in pretty good shape.
So you don't just rip figure 8 rolls for like 5 minutes or something?
Well, that comes next. Yeah, that's the second part.
Cool. I mean, we're pushing an hour of a lot of really useful stuff. I think what we'll do later is I'm going to make sure I get in touch with all three of you, and we'll compile a list of all of the books and materials you all mentioned that we can post to the Georgia Percussive Arts Society chapter Facebook page. For anyone who's interested, please hop over there. Join us if you're not already. That way you can keep up to date with anything we're doing in the future. Is there anything else anybody wanted to throw out there? Any other instruments or topics that we didn't hit that maybe don't fit in, but they're a big part of warming up for you?
Not really. Nope.
Fair enough.
do think we should shout out our friends and colleagues over at Lambert High School today. A lot of people over there competing in the JIPA contest. So we hope that those guys will check out our stream later, and we definitely plan to check out the competition and see how all the groups are doing.
And we're going to go and shout it out right now that soon we're going to get a couple of the marching people. I'm going to name Marcus Hawkins and Alan Sears. If you're watching, watch out, because you're going to be live with us next. We're going to talk marching stuff. Sorry, I think I might have cut somebody off. Nathaniel, were you about to say something?
Nope.
Okay. Well, in that case, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. We had a little bit of interaction over here on the chat. I've been kind of trying to type back as we go. This, of course, will be archived on the YouTube page. So anybody, please, again, subscribe, leave comments, because we'll keep checking this and we'll bring this again over to the Facebook page so we can do these more in the future, answer any questions you have, and we'll include links to all the materials discussed today. So unless anybody else has anything to say, we'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you for joining us today with the Georgia chapter of the Percussive Arts Society, and we'll see everybody again soon.
Thanks, everybody.